If you're ever having a bad day, just remember, there's a guy in history who inherited one of the most powerful governments on planet Earth and, well, accidentally became its very last employee. That man is Tokugawa Yoshinobu.
Okay, let's dive into this impossible scenario. Imagine being promoted to CEO literally right as the company catches fire. The shareholders are violently revolting, and someone casually taps you on the shoulder to announce, "Oh, by the way, we're abolishing the company." Truly outstanding timing, right?
To understand the sheer, crushing weight of this inheritance, you just have to consider this number, 250. Because for over 250 years, the Tokugawa family basically ran Japan with absolute authority and astonishing stability. They created a system that lasted for generations, maintaining an absolutely unprecedented era of peace.
Now you gotta realize, that peace wasn't just magically handed to them. The Tokugawa shogunate ruled with the relentless energy of an incredibly paranoid landlord. They maintained an iron grip on absolutely everything and everyone, just to ensure nobody could even think about challenging their power.
And what's really fascinating here is just how bizarre and controlling these rules actually were. You want to travel? You need permission. Foreign visitors? Absolutely not. Christian missionaries? Hard pass. But the most ingenious, paranoid rule of the whole shebang? The regional lords. They could keep their power, sure, but only if they left their families in the capital as, essentially, very polite hostages. It's the political equivalent of saying, hey, we totally trust you, but your wife and kids are just going to stay right here. For reasons. And somehow, this wild hostage system actually worked. It forced a stable environment where brilliant cultural advancements, like kabuki theater and those beautiful woodblock prints, completely flourished.
But there was just one tiny issue with this perfectly isolated bubble. The rest of the world didn't stop existing. While Japan was busy perfecting art and theater, Europe and America were inventing factories, railroads, steam engines, industrial warfare, and increasingly creative ways to ruin everyone else's afternoon. And suddenly, a world-shattering external threat completely broke the silence.
Picture this. It's 1853, and Commodore Matthew Perry from America sails directly into Edo Bay. He brings with him 4 massive, steam-powered warships. Now, to the completely isolated locals of Japan, these incredible machines literally looked like floating volcanoes, huge, pitch black, covered in cannons, and belching out thick smoke. Imagine spending 2 centuries completely ignoring your neighbors, and then one morning an aircraft carrier essentially parks right outside your front door. Perry delivered a wonderfully simple, diplomatic message. Open your ports.
But the terrifying footnote to that message was delivered by the 70-plus massive naval guns sitting right behind him. Japan took one look at these industrial weapons and immediately looked around for a navy capable of stopping them. There wasn't one. Zero. And that is the exact moment the entire centuries-old Tokugawa system quietly realized, oh, we might have a huge problem. So right into this absolute nightmare steps Tokugawa Yoshinobu. He is smart, highly educated, and incredibly politically talented. He's exactly the kind of leader you would want running the country, say, 20 years earlier. Instead, after endless assassinations, intense palace drama, and enough political backstabbing to fuel multiple seasons of an HBO series, he finally becomes shogun in 1866. His grand inheritance? National humiliation, economic chaos, angry samurai, relentless foreign pressure, and several of his own provinces actively plotting his immediate unemployment. And this brilliantly illustrates the real problem, because the biggest threat wasn't even America anymore. It was Japan itself. Powerful rebel domains like Satsuma and Shoshu had looked at Western weapons and realized that muskets from the 1500s suddenly felt a little, well, vintage, so they modernized. The rebels got their hands on new rifles, modern artillery, and Western military training. Meanwhile, many of the government troops defending the shogun still believed their traditional swords were going to solve industrial age problems. They were accidentally fighting next century's war.
Now, Yoshinobu wasn't stupid. He clearly saw that the old, isolated system just could not survive forever against this rapid level of modernization. So in 1867, he tries a highly intelligent, completely unexpected gamble. He voluntarily hands political authority back to Emperor Meiji. Honestly, on paper, it's not a terrible move. Except for one highly naive assumption. He assumed he'd still get to help run the country afterward. Instead, the new imperial government essentially replied, "Thank you for your service, you may now leave." That is when everything exploded.
The rejection sparked a devastating civil war, plunging the entire nation straight into the infamous Battle of Toba-Fushimi. Now, mathematically, Yoshinobu's army should have completely steamrolled the opposition. They had more soldiers. They had way more experience. But modern rifles have a deeply unfair habit of entirely ignoring samurai tradition.
And then came the psychological kill shot. Right in the middle of the carnage, the imperial banner appeared on the battlefield. Suddenly, this wasn't just another civil war. The shogun's forces were frozen by a terrifying realization. They had to ask themselves, wait, are we literally shooting at the emperor? That one question caused entire groups of soldiers to switch sides faster than politicians after an election. So, Yoshinobu leaves. He completely walks away from the battlefield. Historians still fiercely debate this moment. Did he panic, or did he simply recognize a lost cause before thousands more people died? If continuing the war almost certainly destroys your own capital city, do you fight because honor demands it, or surrender because reality does?
I'm genuinely curious where you'd land on that, because what Yoshinobu chose to do next changed the trajectory of Japan forever. Imperial forces were marching relentlessly toward Edo. Over 1 million civilians lived in that city. A full-scale assault would have been an absolute catastrophe. But instead of blood in the streets, we get negotiations. No dramatic last stand, no glorious final charge, no Hollywood explosion burning 1 million civilians to the ground. Just two experienced statesmen sitting across a wooden table, deciding that maybe burning one of the world's largest cities wasn't actually a fantastic idea. Edo Castle surrendered peacefully. A government that had ruled for more than 2.5 centuries ended with paperwork.
I mean, imagine the Roman Empire collapsing simply because everyone signed the correct documents. After losing his massive empire, Yoshinobu walked away and entered what might be history's most bizarrely peaceful retirement arc. There was no quest for vengeance.
So the crucial point is, he completely abandoned any political maneuvering or conspiracy. There was absolutely no comeback tour. He just let it all go.
Instead, he bought a camera. And then he bought a penny-farthing bicycle. You know, those ridiculous Victorian ones with the giant front wheel that looks like physics itself made a terrible mistake. He spent years peacefully photographing bridges, trains, rivers, and landscapes. And hilariously, there is a report that he once completely crashed this ridiculous bicycle because he got distracted looking at an attractive woman. Think about that imagery for a second. The former absolute military ruler of Japan, defeated not by an overwhelming army, but by attractive people and basic poor road safety. That is a surprisingly relatable, almost comedic ending to a terrifyingly tense political career. But even stranger is how his story actually ends. History usually does not give fallen dictators happy endings. But Yoshinobu? The new imperial government eventually forgave him completely. They restored his noble status, awarded him honors, and actually invited him back into the new aristocracy. Which brings us to this incredibly evocative thought. Maybe the most important victory of his life wasn't keeping power. Maybe it was realizing exactly when to let it go. True leadership isn't always about clinging to control at all costs. Because while emperors, fierce generals, and passionate revolutionaries were busy bleeding to create modern Japan, the last shogun was just quietly standing behind a camera, peacefully watching modern history develop, one photograph at a time.
But before we go, I'll leave you with this one final, provocative detail that almost everyone skips over. Despite losing the country, despite the Civil War, and despite handing over a 250-year-old empire, the Tokugawa family never actually disappeared. Which makes you wonder, just how much quiet power do they still hold today?